Deep in the tangled heart of the Central American rainforest, there is a silence that feels ancient. A silence so complete, so all-encompassing, that it almost presses against your skin. It is not the silence of peace, but of absence, of voices lost, of cities forgotten, of gods no longer worshipped. Under layers of moss and centuries of leaf litter, the earth hides 1,000 secrets. Stone monuments carved with precision, staircases leading to nowhere, temples raised to once mighty deities. In the shadows of the trees, colossal pyramids stand in defiance of time. These ruins are not the remnants of a forgotten village or a tribal outpost. They are what remains of a civilization that once commanded one of the most powerful and advanced cultures in the ancient world. This was the land of the Maya. A people who built vast cities without metal tools, without beasts of burden, without the wheel. A people who read the stars like scripture, who recorded the passage of time in calendars more precise than those of Europe for centuries to come. A people who erected monuments not only to their kings, but to ideas, power, divinity, time, and death. And then, at the height of their glory, they disappeared. It is perhaps the greatest enigma in pre-Columbian history. How did such a remarkable civilization, so advanced, so vast, so deeply rooted in both art and science, collapse? What force, seen or unseen, could bring the Maya world to its knees? The mystery begins not with destruction, but with silence. By the late 8th century, the Maya civilization had reached astonishing heights. In the cities of the southern lowlands, Tikal, Palenque, Copan, and dozens more, elaborate ceremonial centers soared above the jungle canopy. These were urban marvels, organized, sophisticated, filled with bustling marketplaces, astronomers, scholars, scribes, warriors, priests, and kings who claimed divine right to rule. They governed vast territories, waged ritual wars, exchanged goods and ideas across hundreds of miles. They measured time in centuries and tracked celestial cycles with chilling accuracy. Their glyphs chronicled not just the events of royal courts, but eclipses, equinoxes, and the turning of ages. And then, by the early 9th century, something began to unravel. Monuments that had once been covered in fresh inscriptions stood blank. Temples ceased to rise. Stelae, the stone slabs that proudly proclaimed the deeds of kings, were no longer carved. Cities that had flourished for hundreds of years were suddenly, inexplicably, abandoned.
Not destroyed by fire, not razed in battle, simply left behind, emptied out like a breath. There were no smoking ruins, no mass graves, no single moment of cataclysm, just a great unraveling, a slow, eerie fade into oblivion. And that is what makes the Maya collapse so haunting. It wasn't sudden like Pompeii. It wasn't forced like the fall of the Aztecs at the hands of Spanish steel. It was subtler, creeping, fragmented, and incomplete. Even today, there is no single theory that explains it. For generations, scholars believed the Maya collapse to be a myth. Many thought the ruins they found were too advanced to have been built by indigenous people. Wild theories spread, of lost races, of Atlantis, of influence from Egypt or the Old World. It wasn't until the 20th century that the truth began to emerge. The Maya were not some lost tribe, but the creators of a monumental legacy, one written in stone, sky, and blood. And they had vanished from their great cities, but not from the world. The Maya people still exist. Their bloodlines are unbroken. Their languages still spoken in mountain villages and jungle towns across Guatemala, Mexico, and beyond. Their ceremonies still performed. Their gods still honored. Quietly, defiantly. What disappeared was not a people, but a political and cultural high point, the heart of their classical civilization. So the question becomes, what broke that heart? Could it have been the earth itself? Geologists and climate scientists now believe that a series of prolonged, severe droughts struck the Maya lowlands between the years 800 and 1050 AD. Evidence from lakebed sediments and cave formations shows dramatic drops in rainfall, enough to disrupt crops, dry up reservoirs, and cause famine. When water fails, societies break. But the Maya had survived drought before. Could it have been war? The Maya city-states were not united under a single empire. They were fractious, competitive, each with its own king, its own pride, its own army. Intercity warfare was a part of life, and many battles were ritualized. But as the classic period wore on, the warfare grew more destructive. Cities rose and fell in rapid succession. Some were burnt. Some kings were captured, their monuments desecrated.
Could it have been rebellion? Archaeological digs have found signs that peasants may have risen up against their elites. The massive palaces and ceremonial centers relied on tribute and labor from surrounding farmlands. If drought brought famine and war brought instability, the people may have lost faith in the divine kings who once promised balance and abundance. Could it have been environmental collapse? The Maya practiced intensive agriculture, terracing hillsides, draining swamps, and clearing forests. But over time, the land may have failed them. Soil erosion, deforestation, and exhausted fields could have triggered a crisis of sustainability. In the end, they may have simply outgrown the ecosystem that sustained them. Or could it have been all of these things? A perfect storm, environmental stress, social unrest, political chaos, and spiritual crisis, all colliding within a few generations. A world crumbling from within. What makes this mystery so unsettling is not just the collapse itself, but how familiar it feels. A thriving civilization built on innovation and vision, undone by its own complexity. Warnings ignored, faith shaken, systems stretched until they snapped. The Maya left behind no singular explanation, only clues. In abandoned cities, archaeologists find unfinished temples, construction halted midway. In others, they find hastily buried monuments, toppled statues, or ceremonial objects cast into wells. There are signs of desperation, of departure, of a slow, irreversible decay. Yet while the southern cities fell, others in the north, like Chichen Itza, rose in their place. The Maya world shifted, adapted, changed. The flame did not go out entirely. It flickered, moved, and evolved. And still, the question echoes like footsteps through a hollow temple. How does a civilization that mastered the stars forget to look up? How does a people so attuned to balance lose it so completely? How does greatness vanish, not with a bang, but with silence? The jungle remembers. The stones endure. The glyphs speak, though their meanings still elude us in part. We look at the Maya collapse not just with curiosity, but with a kind of reverence. Because in their story, there is something universal, something timeless, a reminder that no civilization, no matter how advanced, is immune to the weight of its own contradictions. The Maya story is not one of failure. It is one of change, of transformation, of warning. Because sometimes the past disappears not to be forgotten, but to be understood.
Before their cities crumbled, before the jungle reclaimed their temples and plazas, before the mystery of their fall took root in our imagination, the Maya rose. They rose from the mists of prehistory, thousands of years before the pyramids of Tikal pierced the sky. Their origins stretch far deeper into time than many realize. Into a world not of stone and glyphs, but of shifting villages, sacred mountains, and quiet revolutions. To understand the Maya collapse, we must first understand their rise, one of the most extraordinary ascents in the story of human civilization. The journey begins around 2000 BCE, in the humid lowlands and highland valleys of what is now southern Mexico, Guatemala, Belize, western Honduras, and El Salvador. Here, in the cradle of Mesoamerica, small communities of early farmers began to cultivate maize, beans, squash, and cacao, the crops that would become the foundation of Maya life. These early Maya were not yet builders of great cities. They lived in simple homes of thatch and clay, organized around kinship and ritual. But even in this early period, the signs of something greater were stirring. By 1000 BCE, ceremonial centers began to rise, modest yet unmistakably sacred. Platforms were built from earth and stone. The first hints of cosmology took shape, rituals that aligned with the sun and stars. The Maya were beginning to map not just the land around them, but the heavens above. Over centuries, these communities grew more complex. Pottery became more ornate. Social hierarchies began to form. Long-distance trade brought obsidian, jade, and feathers from distant regions. And with each generation, a deeper sense of identity, purpose, and divine order began to take hold. By the time we enter the pre-classic period, around 1000 BCE to 250 CE, the Maya world was already vast. The first great cities emerged: Nakbay, El Mirador, and Kaminahuyu. These were not mere villages. They featured massive causeways, towering platforms, and ceremonial plazas that hinted at a society already reaching toward the divine. El Mirador, in particular, stood as a colossus in the jungle, a city of monumental scale, centuries before the classical zenith. Its Danta pyramid, still one of the largest in the world by volume, testified to the ambition and organization of its people. This was not a civilization waiting to rise. It was already climbing. The Maya worldview, so deeply rooted in cycles, time, and celestial order, was already shaping their society. Time was sacred. The past was not gone. It echoed eternally. Every act, every ritual, every stone laid in a pyramid echoed across spiritual dimensions. Rulers did not merely govern, they communicated with gods and ancestors. Power was both political and divine. Then came the classic period. From around 250 to 900 CE, the Maya entered what many consider their golden age. This was the era of splendor, of city-states in full bloom, when the jungle was dotted with rival kingdoms, each one a hub of culture, power, and divine rule. Cities like Tikal, Palenque, Copan, Calakmul, Karakol, and Yaxchilan flourished, each with its own dynasty, its own sacred traditions, and its own architectural masterpieces. Tikal, one of the greatest of all Maya cities, rose to prominence in the Guatemalan lowlands. Its skyline bristled with massive pyramids, some rising over 70 meters into the canopy. Its temples were not just monuments, they were portals between the earthly and the divine. Tikal was a powerhouse, home to a dynasty that ruled for more than 800 years, its history carved into towering stelae and temple walls. To the north, Palenque thrived in the lush hills of Chiapas. Known for its refined architecture and poetic inscriptions, it was home to the legendary king Kinich Janab Pakal the Great, who ruled for nearly 70 years. His tomb, discovered in the Temple of the Inscriptions, revealed one of the most iconic images of Maya mythology, a king descending into the underworld, surrounded by cosmic symbols of death and rebirth. To the south, in what is now Honduras, lay Copan, a city renowned for its artistry and intellectual depth. Copan's stelae are among the most detailed and expressive of the Maya world. Here, scribes and sculptors immortalized complex dynastic histories and cosmological cycles in stone. The city's famous hieroglyphic stairway, with over 2,000 glyphs, is the longest known text from the ancient Maya. Each city-state was a world unto itself, connected through alliances, marriages, warfare, and trade. But they were not ruled by a single emperor or centralized government. The Maya political world was a constellation of competing powers, bound by shared beliefs, languages, and sacred time. and time itself was central to their rise. The Maya developed one of the most complex calendar systems in history, combining a 260-day sacred calendar with a 365-day solar cycle. These systems interlocked, forming a calendar round of 52 years. But more remarkable still was their long counts calendar, a linear reckoning of time that could stretch back thousands of years. They dated events with incredible precision. Births, accessions, wars, eclipses, all inscribed with exactitude. Their mathematicians understood the concept of zero centuries before it appeared in Europe. They observed Venus with obsessive care, timing battles and ceremonies to its risings and settings. They were not just recording time, they were living within its sacred rhythm.
Religion, too, played a powerful role in their rise. The Maya pantheon was vast and ever-shifting, filled with gods of sun and rain, maize and death, creation and sacrifice. The cosmos was seen as a layered reality, a sky realm above, an earthly plane in the middle, and an underworld, Xibalba, beneath. Kings acted as mediators, performing elaborate rituals to maintain cosmic balance. Blood offerings, human sacrifice, and hallucinogenic trances were tools of divine communion. In the classic period, this fusion of religion, power, and science created a world where kings ruled not just by birthright, but by divine favor. Their legitimacy was etched in stone, reinforced by monumental architecture, and confirmed through cycles of ritual warfare. The scale of Maya achievement during this era is difficult to overstate. They engineered vast water management systems, reservoirs, canals, aqueducts, allowing massive urban populations to thrive in difficult environments. Their trade network stretched from the highlands of Mexico to the Caribbean coast. They built observatories to chart the heavens. Their artwork, paintings, sculpture, ceramics revealed a world of elegance, precision, and layered meaning. This was not a civilization passively existing in nature's shadow. It was actively shaping its world, transforming forests into farmland, jungles into cities, beliefs into power. And yet, for all their brilliance, the seeds of collapse were already being planted. Population growth strained resources. Competition between cities grew fiercer. The religious and political systems that had held them together began to fray under the weight of their own complexity. But those are the threads of a different chapter. For now, in this golden age, the Maya stood at the heights of their power. Scientists, engineers, philosophers, kings. They had reached for the stars, and in many ways, they had grasped them. Their pyramids still rise from the earth like echoes of ambition. Their glyphs still whisper stories across time. Their legacy was not written in conquest or empire, but in intellect, vision, and devotion to the mysteries of existence. Before they fell, they soared. To understand the Maya is to step into a world where stone was carved with thought, time was measured in sacred beats, and knowledge was revered as a divine gift. They did not build their world on conquest alone, but on observation, precision, and an unyielding quest to understand the universe around them. In a time when much of the world's knowledge was still rooted in myth and oral tradition, the Maya were already measuring the heavens, recording their histories in stone, and calculating vast spans of time with mathematical sophistication that would astonish even future empires. This was not just a civilization that built cities, it built meaning. Mathematics, a sacred language. Long before the concept of zero reached Europe or Asia, the Maya had already mastered it. It was one of their greatest intellectual triumphs, the development of a fully functional positional number system that included zero, not merely as a placeholder, but as an actual number with value and significance. The Maya used a vigimesimal system, based on 20 rather than 10. This system used only 3 simple symbols: a dot representing 1, a bar representing 5, and a shell-shaped glyph to represent 0. These symbols, when combined vertically, could express vast numbers with astonishing clarity.
The shell glyph, the 0, first appears around the 4th century CE, centuries before its use in India or the Islamic world. It was a leap forward in human cognition, enabling not only advanced arithmetic but complex calendristic calculations across centuries. Numbers, to the Maya, were not just abstract quantities. They were sacred. Every number carried meaning, cosmic, mythological, often tied to gods, directions, or cycles of creation. Math was a language of the gods. The calendar, time made sacred. Nowhere is this devotion to numbers and cycles more visible than in the Maya calendar, a system so precise, so layered, that modern scholars are still piecing together its full meaning. The Maya didn't just keep time, they lived within it. Their calendars governed not just agriculture or ritual, but politics, war, and identity itself. At the heart of this system were 3 primary calendars, each interwoven into a rich temporal tapestry. First was the Tzolk'in, the 260-day sacred calendar. It consisted of 20 named days combined with 13 numbers, producing a cycle of 260 unique day combinations. This calendar guided religious ceremonies, divinations, and the naming of individuals. Birthdays determined by this calendar were believed to shape one's destiny and spiritual essence. Second was the Ha'ab, a 365-day solar calendar, composed of 18 months of 20 days, plus a final short month of 5 nameless days known as Wayeb, a time considered unlucky and spiritually dangerous. But it was the long counts calendar that elevated Maya timekeeping into cosmic territory. The long counts did not repeat within a human lifetime. It was a linear reckoning of time beginning from a mythical creation date, equivalent to August 11, 3114 BCE in the Gregorian calendar. From this cosmic dawn, the Maya counted forward in base 20 units called baktuns, katuns, tons, and kins, measuring cycles of time that span thousands upon thousands of years. Their records tracked events deep into the past and projected far into the future. Time wasn't fleeting to the Maya, it was eternal. Every date held power, every alignment echoed with meaning. They believed time itself could be summoned, negotiated, even rewritten through ritual. Their calendar wasn't just a tool, it was a map of the universe. Astronomy, reading the heavens. To chart time, the Maya turned their eyes skyward. In the absence of telescopes or modern instruments, they built observatories, circular towers, narrow windows, and temple alignments to study the movements of the sun, moon, stars, and planets. The Maya knew when solar eclipses would occur. They tracked the path of the sun across the year, building ceremonial sensors that aligned with solstices and equinoxes. They recognized the 584-day cycle of Venus with such accuracy that their records rivaled the precision of NASA's calculations today. Why Venus? Because Venus, to the Maya, was more than a bright point of light. It was the planet of war, of death, and rebirth. Its risings and settings were considered omens. Battles were timed to its appearance. Kings watched the sky before declaring war. The Maya believed that by understanding the heavens, they could align their society with divine will. The movement of the stars was not random, it was prophecy. Astronomy was not only science, it was religion, politics, and fate. In cities like Copan and Uxmal, structures were precisely aligned to solar and stellar events. In Chichen Itza, the famous El Castillo pyramid produces a shadowy serpent that slithers down its staircase on the equinox, a visual marvel that reflects both astronomical genius and spiritual symbolism. Monumental architecture, cities of stone and sky. But perhaps nothing embodies Maya brilliance more than the cities they built, stone metropolises that emerged from the jungle like visions. They had no metal tools, no beasts of burden, no pulleys or wheels, and yet they moved mountains.
pyramids that soared above the treetops, temples with intricate corbel arches, palaces with hundreds of rooms, ball courts, plazas, reservoirs, causeways, all laid out according to sacred geometries and celestial alignments. Each city was a cosmic diagram, a mirror of the heavens on earth. The central plaza often represented the axis mundi, the center of the world, connecting the underworld, the mortal plane, and the heavens above. The structures themselves were covered in meaning. Roof combs towered above temples like crowns. Stucco reliefs depicted gods, kings, serpents, and jaguars. Every surface told a story. The cities of the Maya weren't just places to live. They were built environments for ceremony, power, and performance. They were theaters of the divine. In Palenque, the Temple of the Inscriptions rises in quiet majesty above the jungle, a tomb to King Tikal, a ruler portrayed not as a man, but as a god traveling through the cosmos. In Copan, the intricately carved altar queue depicts 16 rulers in succession, their names and faces preserved in stone, their legacy bound to the city's divine order. In Uxmal, the Pyramid of the Magician curves in ways that challenge modern engineers, yet stands after centuries with barely a crack. In every corner of these cities, geometry, myth, and power converge. Writing, language of stone and spirit. And what makes it all the more extraordinary is that the Maya wrote it all down. They developed the most sophisticated writing system in the ancient Americas. Hundreds of intricate glyphs, each representing sounds, syllables, words, or entire concepts. These hieroglyphs adorned monuments, altars, staircases, and ceramics. They were written in codices, books made of bark paper, folded like accordions and inked with obsidian black and blood-red pigments. The Maya wrote their histories, their rituals, their lineages. They recorded births, coronations, eclipses, offerings, wars, and cosmic events. Their scribes were mathematicians, priests, and poets. For centuries, their writing was a mystery. After the Spanish conquest, thousands of Maya books were burned. Their glyphs declared the language of the devil. Only 4 codices survived. But beginning in the mid-20th century, scholars working with Maya communities and descendants began to unlock the code. Glyph by glyph, the Maya voice began to speak again. And what it said was extraordinary. The Maya were not a lost people. They were thinkers, builders, visionaries. They lived in a world of immense beauty and complexity, a world of stars and gods, of war and peace, of math and myth. They left behind no empire in the European sense, no armies of conquest that spanned continents. But what they did leave was a body of knowledge, of architecture, of language, of cosmic vision that still stuns the modern mind. They understood that time was a cycle, that meaning could be built into every stone, that death and rebirth were twin forces in all things. They rose not just as a civilization, but as a revelation.
When we think of the Maya, we often picture towering pyramids, dense jungles, and lost cities swallowed by time. But for every king who ascended a temple and every priest who whispered to the gods, there were thousands more. Farmers, artisans, scribes, merchants, warriors, children. The Maya city was not just a place of ritual and power. It was alive, a network of homes, markets, temples, and farms where daily life unfolded in complex rhythms under the gaze of the gods. To walk through a Maya city was to enter a living organism, carefully planned, deeply spiritual, and humming with human purpose. Urban planning, the sacred blueprint. Maya cities were not laid out at random. They were designed with intention, guided by cosmology, terrain, and the flow of ritual. Streets, temples, and palaces aligned with celestial bodies. The orientation of plazas reflected the path of the sun and the structure of the universe itself.
The city center was the heart, the sacred precinct. Here, pyramids loomed over ceremonial plazas, their steep steps leading to temples dedicated to gods, ancestors, and time. The royal palace, often a sprawling compound with courtyards and corridors, was both a residence and a political command center. Ball courts, spaces of athleticism, sacrifice, and myth, were common in almost every urban core. Radiating outward from this center were the homes of nobles, scribes, merchants, and, further still, the thatched dwellings of commoners and farmers. These zones were connected by causeways, or sakbayab, white roads built from limestone and gravel. They linked not only parts of a single city, but sometimes entire cities across regions, glowing under the moonlight like veins of light in the jungle. Water was life. In cities where natural rivers and lakes were scarce, the Maya engineered vast systems of cisterns, aqueducts, and reservoirs. In places like Calacals, enormous underground water catchments sustained tens of thousands through dry seasons, their stone linings sealed with clay and painstaking labor. But the Maya did not see their cities as merely human creations. They were sacred spaces, mirrors of the cosmos. The pyramid was the mountain of the gods, the central plaza, the axis mundi. Every structure, every alignment had meaning. Living in a Maya city meant walking every day in a world charged with spiritual energy. The political pyramid, kings and counselors. At the top of Maya society stood the Ajau, the king. But this was no ordinary monarch. The Ajau was both ruler and high priest, a divine intermediary between the people and the gods. His bloodline was sacred, his duty was cosmic. He did not merely govern, he performed rituals to ensure the balance of the world, to summon rain, fertility, victory.
Kings wore headdresses taller than men, adorned with jade, feathers, and carved obsidian. Their regalia echoed the gods they represented. Their titles were elaborate, sometimes taking minutes to recite. They ruled from thrones of stone, often inscribed with their deeds, battles won, alliances forged, ancestors invoked. But they did not rule alone. The royal court was a hive of power. Priests, scribes, military captains, and nobles all formed the scaffolding of rule. There were councils of advisors, complex systems of tribute, and elite families who wielded regional power. Some queens, like Lady Six Sky of Naranjo, held authority in their own right, proving that Maya politics, while hierarchical, could also be flexible in the face of ambition and circumstance. The political life of the city was never far from its religious one. Every war declaration, coronation, or diplomatic marriage was sanctified by ritual. Politics and religion were two faces of the same mask. The sacred flame, religion and ritual. Religion infused every aspect of Maya life. Theirs was a pantheon vast and varied, gods of maize and lightning, death and wind, the sun and the underworld. These deities were not static icons. They shifted, merged, reappeared in different guises depending on the calendar, the region, and the ritual. Life was seen as a cycle of creation and destruction. The universe had been made and unmade multiple times. The Maya believed their world existed in a fragile balance, one that needed constant renewal through ceremony and sacrifice. In the cities, temples smoked with burning copal resin. Priests climbed the pyramids barefoot, offerings in hand, bloodied blades glinting in the sun. Sacrifice, animal and human, was not brutality but reciprocity. It was giving life back to the gods who had sacrificed themselves to create the world. Blood was the most sacred substance. Kings and priests performed bloodletting rituals, piercing tongues, ears, and genitals to draw sacred ichor. The blood-soaked bark paper, which was then burned, sending the essence skyward. Rituals could last days, accompanied by fasting, dancing, music, and trance. Hallucinogens derived from frogs, mushrooms, or tobacco were used to enter altered states. In these trances, priests communicated with gods, ancestors, and the spirits of the underworld. Every ceremony had its moment in time.
The calendar dictated when to sow, when to reap, when to fight, when to pray. Time, in the Maya world, was a deity in itself, unfolding in sacred rhythm, demanding reverence. The pulse of the city, daily life and labor. Yet beneath the towering pyramids and holy fires, everyday life thrived. Most Maya were farmers, living outside the central city zones. They cultivated maize, the life crop, along with beans, squash, chili, tomatoes, and cacao. The classic trio, maize, beans, and squash, provided the foundation of the Maya diet and economy. Maize wasn't just food, it was a sacred origin story. The gods, they believed, had created humans from maize dough. Farming was done by hand, with stone tools, fire clearing, and shifting plots. In denser urban centers, they constructed raised fields and terraced hillsides to maximize productivity. Trade was constant. Markets bustled with color and sound, vendors shouting prices, artisans displaying carved jade, woven textiles, clay pottery, obsidian blades. Cacao beans were used as currency, exchanged for salt, dried fish, feathers, incense, and honey. Long-distance traders known as peoplum traveled between city-states by foot or canoe, linking the Maya world from coast to highland. Social life unfolded in neighborhoods, family compounds, and communal kitchens. People gathered to grind maize into masa, to bake tortillas, to share gossip, stories, and songs passed down across generations. Artisans were highly skilled. Potters painted vessels with royal scenes. Stone carvers chiseled glyphs with supernatural precision. Weavers produced garments dyed with rich blues and reds, colors prized for their beauty and sacred associations. Children learned early. Girls helping with food, boys learning farming or craft. Noble sons studied the glyphs and calendar. Daughters were trained in music and diplomacy. Education was tied to class, but spiritual knowledge was always honored. The Maya had no standing army, but warfare was part of life. Cities raided each other for tributes, captives, prestige. Warriors wore jaguar pelts and body paints, fighting with obsidian-tipped spears and atlatls. Captives were paraded through cities, sometimes sacrificed, sometimes enslaved, sometimes adopted into new households. Despite rigid hierarchy, Maya society was held together by ritual, kinship, and shared belief. Elders were respected, ancestors were honored. The dead were buried beneath homes, in graves lined with offerings, shells, food, jade beads, figurines, so that their spirits might live on, watching over the living. A civilization of balance. To live in a Maya city was to move through a world of profound duality, life and death, order and chaos, sun and shadow, heaven and Xibalba. It was a world where every sunrise was a renewal, every structure a story, every action woven into a vast cosmic design. Here, beneath the temples and beside the causeways, among the farmers and the scribes, the true genius of the Maya unfolded, not just in what they built, but in how they lived. With purpose, with reverence, with eyes lifted to the stars.
There comes a time in every great civilization when all its energies, its intellect, its artistry, its power converge into a moment of brilliance, a golden era, a peak. For the ancient Maya, this time was the Classic period, between 250 and 900 CE, a span of centuries when their cities pulsed with life, their kings carved their names into eternity, and their culture soared to breathtaking heights. It was an age of architects and astronomers, poets and priests, warriors and weavers. The jungle was no longer an obstacle, it was a stage. And on it, the Maya performed the grand drama of civilization. The radiance of culture. To step into the heart of a Maya city during this era was to be overwhelmed, not only by its sheer size, but by the orchestration of meaning in every stone and ceremony. Culture flourished in ways both seen and unseen. Not only in the towering pyramids that scraped the sky, but in the painted pottery passed from hand to hand, in the melodies of bone flutes echoing through the night, in the rhythmic pulse of festivals that stretched across days and nights. Royal courts became cultural engines. Kings became patrons of sculpture, of astronomy, of ritual performance. Cities like Tikal, Copan, Palenque, and Calakmul didn't just build, they created. The very act of recording time and memory in stone, an innovation few cultures of the ancient world attempted, became a cultural signature. The Maya elite were educated and multilingual, their scribes fluent in the complex glyphic script and steeped in historical and mythological lore. Libraries existed, codices filled with astronomical charts, genealogies, religious texts, though most would later be lost to conquest and flame. Every object crafted, every building raised, every word inscribed was part of a grand conversation with the cosmos. Art was not mere decoration, it was devotion, documentation, declaration. Science at the service of the divine. Beneath this cultural renaissance lay an equally remarkable intellectual one. The Maya refined their calendars, perfected their astronomical predictions, and maintained meticulous records of celestial cycles. They could chart the phases of the moon, predict solar eclipses, and calculate planetary movements with accuracy that rivals and sometimes surpasses modern instruments.
Observatories like those in Copan and Uxmal were aligned with stellar phenomena. At Caracol in Belize, alignments marked solstices and equinoxes. In Chichen Itza, El Caracol, the snail, was a round observatory whose windows aligned with Venus's key positions on the horizon. Mathematics underpinned it all. Their base 20 system and use of zero allowed for complex computations over thousands of years. They used this knowledge not simply to measure time, but to sanctify it. Every festival, every coronation, every war had to occur on a cosmologically appropriate day. Science and spirituality were one. Diplomacy and rivalry, cities as sovereigns. At its peak, the Maya world was not an empire in the traditional sense. There was no single emperor, no centralized state. Instead, the landscape was a mosaic of powerful, independent city-states, each a kingdom unto itself, ruled by a divine king, each vying for prestige, tribute, and cosmic favor. Some of these cities formed alliances through marriage, trade, or shared ancestry. Others clashed in brutal rivalries that spanned generations, fought not for territory alone, but for captives, reputation, and religious justification. The rivalry between Tikal and Calakmul was one of the most legendary. These two superpowers, separated by jungle and ideology, competed for dominance over the southern lowlands. Their wars drew in smaller cities like Dos Pilas and Caracol, who chose sides, shifted loyalties, and sometimes paid dearly for it. These weren't aimless conflicts. War was strategic, calculated, often fought for the capture of rival kings or nobles, prizes for ritual sacrifice and symbolic supremacy. A captured king might be paraded through the victor's city, tortured, then offered to the gods in a blood-soaked ceremony. But diplomacy also played its part. Cities exchanged envoys. Royal marriages solidified alliances. Trade agreements were brokered, and festivals were co-hosted. The Maya elite often traveled between courts, forming a network of political communication that spanned hundreds of miles. Each city's stelae and inscriptions recorded not just its triumphs, but its grievances, its alliances, its celestial blessings. History, carved into stone, became a weapon as powerful as any obsidian blade. The pinnacle of artistic expression. Amid this web of power, the Maya created some of the most sophisticated and expressive art of the ancient world. Sculpture was paramount, freestanding stelae, carved altars, lintels, and staircases all bore intricate scenes of kings in ceremonial dress, gods emerging from the mouths of serpents, and glyphic texts flowing like rivers across the surface. Every line, every curl of a headdress, every glyph held significance.
To the trained eye, a stela wasn't just a carving, it was a narrative, a cosmic proclamation. The city of Copan, for instance, became renowned for its artistic refinement. Here, sculptors achieved a fluidity and grace rarely seen elsewhere. The hieroglyphic stairway of Copan, comprising over 2,000 glyphs, is the longest known inscription from the Maya world, a grand testament to dynastic pride. In Palenque, artistry and architecture merged. The Temple of the Inscriptions, the tomb of King Tikal, is a marvel of both engineering and elegance. Deep inside, a jade death mask covered Tikal's face, and carvings told the story of his divine lineage. Murals, though few have survived, once filled palace walls with vibrant life. In Bonampak, preserved paintings show courtly ceremonies, music, and the visceral reality of warfare. Nobles bleeding under torture, dancers adorned in jaguar pelts, musicians pounding drums beneath blood-red skies. Ceramics were equally expressive. Polychrome vases and plates featured mythological scenes, royal feasts, and poetic inscriptions. Some even served as coded messages, gifts exchanged between elites, containers for sacred cacao, offerings to ancestors. Color itself had meaning. Maya blue, a brilliant sky-colored pigment, was made from indigo and rare clay and used for gods, sacrifices, and sacred objects. Red symbolized blood, life, and sacrifice. Black, the underworld. Nothing was accidental. Architectural grandeur. At the height of their civilization, the Maya reshaped the very earth. They flattened hills to create acropolises. They cut through jungle to lay down white limestone roads. They built cities without iron tools or wheels, raising monuments taller than Roman cathedrals, using human labor, willpower, and a profound understanding of space. In Tikal, twin pyramid complexes flanked vast plazas, monuments not only to the gods, but to lineage and statecraft. From the top of Temple I, a ruler could address thousands, framed by jungle canopy and sky. In Uxmal, the Pyramid of the Magician stood with its unusual elliptical base and soaring height. Its facade was adorned with masks of the rain god Chak, rows of hooked noses pleading for seasonal mercy. The Puk style of architecture flourished in this era. Smooth lower walls, highly ornamented upper facades, intricate mosaics of stone, geometric and symbolic. These designs, found across the northern lowlands, show a refined aesthetic sensibility that blended form with spiritual symbolism. Cities weren't just functional, they were theatrical. Each building was a prop in the grand cosmic performance. Processions moved through plazas, rituals unfolded on pyramid tops, and the people, citizens, nobles, slaves, watched, participated, believed. A civilization in full flower. This was the Maya at their apex. They had no standing armies in the Roman sense, no coinage, no imperial roads stretching across a continent. And yet, they forged a world of astonishing complexity and scale, linked not by domination, but by belief, ritual, and shared cosmology. From the highlands of Guatemala to the jungles of Petén to the limestone plains of the Yucatan, their influence spread in stone, in word, in spirit. They were not a people lost in time, they were architects of it, poets of the stars, engineers of memory. And at the height of their glory, they seemed unstoppable. But just beyond the horizon, the jungle began to whisper. Crops faltered, temples grew quiet. Kings went to war, not for glory, but for survival. The peak had been reached, and soon, the fall would come.
There are few moments in human history as haunting as this one. A civilization that once sang in stone, that carved the heavens into calendar and glyph, fell silent. In the heart of the jungle, cities that had once echoed with chants and drums, with laughter, battle cries, and the thunder of feet on sacred plazas, were suddenly still. Temples stood unfinished. Stelae, once carved with reverent care, lay abandoned mid-chisel. Ball courts were overgrown. Causeways, once alive with procession and trade, disappeared into the undergrowth. Somewhere between 800 and 900 CE, something changed, and no one, not even the Maya, would ever record exactly what. This was not the slow ebb of a fading kingdom. This was a collapse,
swift, widespread, mysterious. A silence in the stones. The signs are subtle at first. Inscriptions, the elaborate carved histories on stelae, stairs, and altars become fewer and fewer. By the late 8th century, the record grows quiet. At cities like Copan, Palenque, and Tikal, once vibrant centers of ceremony and power, monumental construction halts abruptly. Great plazas, once maintained with ritual care, begin to crumble. The last known dated monument in the southern lowlands was carved around 909 CE. Then, nothing. For centuries, the Maya had chronicled their world in stone: births, wars, marriages, omens. But in this final century, their voice falters. The great story they were telling, the one etched across cities, monuments, and time, ends mid-sentence.
Not because the Maya disappeared entirely, but because something shattered the world they knew. Cities abandoned, kingdoms fallen. Across the southern lowlands, what is today parts of Guatemala, Belize, and southeastern Mexico, a pattern emerges. Cities are abandoned one after another, not in a single cataclysmic event, but in waves. Tikal, the towering jewel of the Petén Basin, loses its kingship. Its causeways fall into disrepair. The jungle begins to reclaim its temples. Copan, once a bastion of artistic brilliance, declines rapidly after the death of its final known ruler, Yax Pasaj Chanyopat. Its last stela, modest and almost pleading in tone, stands as a quiet epitaph. Dos Pilas, Piedras Negras, Yaxchilan, all once powerful, they crumble. Their dynasties end. Their people leave. This collapse was not isolated. It affected hundreds of cities across an area roughly the size of Italy. By the start of the 10th century, the heartland of the classic Maya world, the southern lowlands, was eerily quiet. But why? Theories in the silence. Historians and archaeologists have debated the causes of the Maya collapse for decades. What makes it so enigmatic is that there's no single obvious explanation. No invading army, no volcanic apocalypse. Instead, there is a web of interconnected pressures, each pulling at the seams of society until they could no longer hold. One theory is environmental collapse. The Maya were deeply dependent on agriculture, particularly maize. Over centuries, their cities had expanded dramatically, leading to intensive deforestation for farmland, fuel, and construction. The fertile topsoil, once protected by forest canopy, eroded. As the population swelled, some estimates say over 10 million in the lowlands alone, the strain on food production intensified. In drought years, the impact would have been catastrophic. Lake sediments and cave formations tell a chilling story. Multiple severe droughts struck the region between 800 and 1000 CE. Crops failed, reservoirs dried, famine likely followed. Without food, the divine kings, seen as intercessors with the gods, lost legitimacy. Rituals couldn't bring rain. Sacrifices went unanswered. The spiritual order unraveled. Another theory, social and political breakdown. The Maya world was not a unified empire, but a tapestry of competing city-states. As pressure grew, so did warfare. Cities that once exchanged nobles through marriage began exchanging warriors through conquest. Evidence of fortifications, mass graves, and burned palaces suggests increased conflict. Captives, once central to ritual life, now overwhelmed it. Kings, once celebrated in stelae, appear less frequently, not because there were none, but because they ruled in fear or from exile. This breakdown of trust between rulers and people, between cities and allies, may have triggered widespread societal collapse. And still other theories point to internal revolt. As elites clung to their privileges and sacred roles, commoners may have lost faith. Evidence of elite compounds burned or abandoned before the rest of the city suggests civil unrest, a slow uprising of the many against the few. Not in battlefields, but in refusal, in walking away. The disappearance from the central lowlands. One of the most striking aspects of the collapse is not just what ended, but what moved.
The abandonment of cities in the lowlands did not mark the end of Maya civilization, but a dramatic shift in its center of gravity. Populations migrated to the highlands of Guatemala, to the northern Yucatan. Cities like Uxmal, Chichen Itza, and later Mayapan would rise in new configurations, with different architectural styles and political systems. The classic world, the world of Tikal and Copan, of stelae and divine kings, was gone. In its place, a new Maya reality would emerge, more regional, more adaptive, but irrevocably changed. The heart of the old world, however, was left behind. Why did people abandon these monumental cities? Perhaps they were no longer sustainable, economically, spiritually, physically. Perhaps they were no longer safe. Or perhaps the people simply stopped believing in the very system that had once built pyramids and summoned gods from smoke. When kings failed to bring rain, when temples no longer resonated with meaning, what was left? They turned their backs on the past and walked into a different future. The sound of absence. Today, when we walk through the ruins of Tikal or Copan, we do not hear the clamoring of armies or the roar of catastrophe. We hear absence. Bird calls echo off stone. Trees grow through courtyards. Roots crack altars. Monuments are weathered, worn, eroded by rain and time. But beneath this silence, we feel something else. The weight of what was. The Maya didn't vanish. Their descendants still live across Mesoamerica, in Guatemala, Belize, southern Mexico, Honduras. They speak over 30 Mayan languages. They farm the same crops. They remember. But the great cities, the sacred cities, they died. Not in a blaze, but in a hush. A collective exhale. Perhaps that is the greatest mystery of all. That a people who etched their lives into eternity could one day choose to stop carving. That a civilization so in tune with the cosmos could lose the rhythm. That for all their knowledge, for all their power, they, like us, were vulnerable. To drought, to war, to forgetting. A civilization on the brink. The sudden silence that fell over the Maya lowlands was not the end, but it was an end. The end of an era of divine kings and cosmic calendars, of pyramid cities and stone-carved history. The classic Maya were not conquered. They collapsed from within, pulled apart by forces both natural and human, sacred and profane. They had risen to extraordinary heights. And then they stopped. The jungle did not weep. It grew. It swallowed temples and roads. It buried the glory. It kept the silence. Until, one day, we began to ask, what happened here? What do these ruins remember? And what can we still learn from the empire that vanished, almost overnight?
The jungle tells no stories, but beneath its roots, beneath centuries of leaf fall and silence, it holds evidence, buried truths etched in soil, stone, and tree rings. As archaeologists dug deeper, as climate scientists drilled into ancient lakebeds and cavern stalactites, a startling revelation began to surface. The fall of the Maya may not have begun with swords or invaders, but with the very earth beneath their feet. The collapse was not just a political failure. It was an environmental reckoning. A land pushed to its limits. For over 1,000 years, the Maya had worked the land with remarkable skill. They built terraces to grow maize, dug reservoirs to trap rainwater, and cleared vast forests for farmland, cities, and roads. In a region without rivers, they engineered solutions to harvest and store water during the rainy season, planning not just for months, but for generations. And yet, for all their innovation, they were not immune to excess. By the time of the late Classic period, roughly 600 to 800 CE, populations had soared. Some estimates suggest as many as 10 to 13 million people lived in the Maya lowlands.
Cities like Tikal, Calakmul, and Karakol had become sprawling urban centers, each supporting tens of thousands of people with no modern infrastructure, no draft animals, and no metal tools. Feeding this population demanded massive agricultural expansion, and that required deforestation on a staggering scale. The trees, once sacred, once seen as spiritual connectors between the heavens and the underworld, were cut down to clear land for crops, to provide fuel for cooking, for pottery kilns, for lime plaster that coated the Great Pyramids and palaces. With each tree lost, the land grew more vulnerable. Without roots to hold soil, erosion set in. Without canopy cover, moisture escaped. And with every passing decade, the earth that had once nourished the Maya became less generous, more fragile. The evidence in the earth. It's one thing to suspect environmental degradation. It's another to prove it. In recent decades, scientists have drilled deep into lake beds, at Lake Chichancana in the Yucatan Peninsula and Lake Salpetén near Tikal. These ancient sediments hold a record of rainfall and drought, year by year, layer by layer, like pages in a book written in mud. What they found was astonishing. Around 800 CE, at the precise moment when cities began to fall silent, sediment layers show a dramatic decrease in rainfall. These weren't short-term fluctuations, they were prolonged droughts spanning decades. Some years saw rainfall drop by as much as 40%. Stalagmites from caves told the same story. Variations in oxygen isotopes revealed long dry spells, beginning in the late 8th century and intensifying over the next 100 years. Even ancient tree rings, narrow and stunted, whispered of thirst and heat. The natural world was undergoing a slow, deadly shift. A civilization built on rain. The Maya world was profoundly dependent on water. Their cities lacked major rivers. Their crops depended on seasonal rains. Their very calendar revolved around the agricultural cycle, planting, harvesting, the arrival of storms. Even the gods were entwined with the weather. Chak, the rain god, was among the most revered. Temples were raised to him. Rituals were performed to summon his favor. Human blood was spilled to bring the skies to weep. But when the rains failed, year after year, the spiritual order faltered. Reservoirs dried, crops withered, famine took root. And the people, desperate and disillusioned, began to question everything. When kings could no longer control the skies, what power did they truly hold? The impact on food supply and society. The environmental consequences weren't just ecological, they were existential. Maize, the sacred grain that formed the foundation of both diet and mythology, began to fail. The gods were believed to have made humans from maize. Now, the maize would not grow. With poor harvests came hunger. With hunger came disease, migration, and unrest. Elites may have tried to hoard what little was left, further fracturing society. Rituals intensified. Some cities show a spike in human sacrifices in their final years, perhaps a desperate plea to the gods or an attempt to reassert control over a population slipping away. In cities like Tikal, where reservoirs once served tens of thousands, researchers found evidence of toxic algae blooms in the final layers, suggesting the water had become undrinkable, stagnant, polluted by waste and overuse. People began to flee, not en masse, but in a slow trickle that became a flood. Families left their homes, temples were left unfinished. Urban centers, so recently the pinnacle of culture and science, were abandoned for smaller, more sustainable settlements. And the kings? They lost the mandate of heaven, they lost their people, and they disappeared into the vines of history. Nature's revenge? The idea that the Maya collapse was driven in part by climate change and environmental stress has reshaped how we view ancient civilizations. It's tempting to think of the past as a separate world, where empires fell by sword alone. But the Maya collapse reminds us that even the most sophisticated societies are at the mercy of nature. And sometimes, nature is pushed too far. The Maya did not know they were cutting down too many trees. They did not foresee the climate turning against them. Their rituals could not predict El Niño patterns or sunspot cycles. They lived with an awe of the natural world, but awe alone could not protect them. It's possible that they noticed the changes, that they tried to adapt, changing their planting patterns, moving their homes, deepening their wells. But in the end, the weight of population, deforestation, and prolonged drought may have simply outpaced their ability to respond. An ominous mirror. Today, the story of the Maya collapse feels more relevant than ever. We too live in a world facing environmental strain. We too cut forests, deplete aquifers, burn fuel to build our cities and monuments. We too rely on weather patterns that are beginning to shift in unpredictable ways. The Maya were brilliant. They mapped the stars. They built without wheels. They kept time more precisely than many of their contemporaries. But they were still human. And humans, when faced with slow-burning disasters, often struggle to act until it is too late. The fall of the Maya does not offer us a single clean lesson, but it does ask a question that echoes through time. What happens when the land can no longer support the people who depend on it? Legacy in the soil. Though many classic cities were abandoned, the Maya people did not vanish. They adapted. In the north and the highlands, they found new ways to live. Cities like Chichen Itza rose in the Yucatan, harnessing cenotes and changing their political models. In the mountains of Guatemala, Maya languages, rituals, and traditions survived conquest, colonization, and centuries of oppression. Even today, Maya farmers burn and clear land to plant maize as their ancestors did. Even today, the rain is prayed for, watched for, blessed when it arrives. The forests regrew around the ruins. The soil holds the memory of collapse and the promise of renewal. The Maya story is not a warning. It is a mirror. It shows us how brilliant and beauty can still fall prey to imbalance, how deeply connected we are to the earth beneath us, and how, if we do not listen to that connection, even the greatest of civilizations can be brought to silence. It was not a single battle, not a coup, not the toppling of one king by another. No, what unfolded across the Maya lowlands in the 8th and 9th centuries was far more complex and far more devastating. It was political disintegration on a civilizational scale. A slow, grinding unraveling of alliances and lineages. A cascade of betrayals, rebellions, and lost legitimacy. An empire not fallen by invaders, but fractured from within. This was not just the collapse of cities. It was the crumbling of belief in power, in ritual, in the divine right to rule. Fractured alliances, shattered peace. For centuries, Maya city-states had existed in a delicate balance, each ruled by a Kuhul Azav, a divine king whose authority flowed from the gods. While competition and warfare were ever present, these conflicts were often ceremonial and strategic, more about capturing nobles than destroying cities. Ritualized combat reinforced status. Marriage alliances maintained peace. Power was negotiated, not annihilated. But by the late Classic period, roughly 750 to 900 CE, something changed. That balance collapsed. The once contained rivalries between great cities like Tikal and Calakmul, Caracal and Naranjo, Dos Pilas and Aguateca spiraled into a chaos of shifting allegiances and total war. Royal dynasties began turning on each other. Vassal states rebelled against their overlords. Long-standing political ties snapped like overdrawn cords. It was the Cold War of the Maya, now turned hot. The fall of the divine kings. For the Maya, kingship wasn't just political, it was cosmic. The king wasn't merely a ruler, he was the axis between heaven and earth. His blood nourished the gods, his rituals ensured the rains. His legitimacy was written in the stars and in the stones. But when that king failed, when drought came, when crops failed, when wars were lost, his divine mandate unraveled. In city after city, rulers could no longer deliver on their promises. Their rituals no longer brought rain. Their power no longer felt ordained, it felt imposed. And the people, those who had toiled to build pyramids, grow maize, pay tribute, began to resist. Rebellion against the elite. Archaeological evidence from sites like Aguateca, Dos Pilas, and Quirigua points to something extraordinary. Violent upheaval not between rival kings, but from below. Elite compounds were burned, palaces smashed. In some cases, noble families fled their homes in haste, leaving behind jade, pottery, even half-eaten meals. This was no gradual fading. It was sudden, desperate, deliberate. Rebellion. After centuries of elite rule, the commoners, perhaps starving, perhaps disillusioned, rose up against their kings and priestly castes. Not everywhere, not all at once. But the pattern repeats across the region. The people didn't just leave because of drought. Some cities were purged of their rulers before they were abandoned. Power had become brittle, authority no longer divine. The Maya world was turning on itself. Breakdown of the political network. The classic Maya world wasn't a monolithic empire. It was a complex mosaic of city-states, each with its own rulers, tributaries, and political hierarchies. What held it all together was interconnectedness, alliances through marriage, diplomacy, religion, and trade. But in the final century, that web began to tear. Emissaries no longer traveled freely. Ceremonial alliances turned to betrayals. Intercity warfare intensified, no longer symbolic but destructive. Trade routes were disrupted or destroyed. Valuable materials, obsidian from the highlands, jade from the Motago Valley, cacao, salt, textiles no longer flowed. With trade went diplomacy. With diplomacy went stability. And in the absence of stability came fear. Kings began fortifying cities, building defensive walls, cutting down forests for palisades. Ceremonial centers, once open and majestic, became guarded, paranoid, war-scarred. The case of Dos Pilas and Aguateca. To understand how quickly things fell apart, we can look to Dos Pilas, a city founded in the mid-7th century as a satellite of Tikal. Its rulers gained power through military prowess and diplomatic cunning, playing larger powers against each other. For a time, Dos Pilas flourished, until it became a lightning rod in an increasingly unstable world. By the late 8th century, its neighbors rose in revolt. Evidence from Aguateca, where the royal court later fled, paints a vivid picture. An elite stronghold suddenly attacked and burned. Abandoned ceremonial objects, scattered noble possessions left as the ruling class fled into the night. The collapse was swift. There was no time to pack, no time to defend. The political order crumbled and left only ashes. Collapse from the top down. In many ancient civilizations, collapse begins at the margins. Here, it started at the top. The Maya elite had built a world of stunning complexity, but that complexity became its weakness. Their legitimacy rested on supernatural performance. Their economy relied on constant tribute. Their control depended on loyalty, enforced not through law, but through fear, ritual, and spectacle. When crops failed, when the rains did not come, when wars turned inward, every pillar of elite power was tested, and ultimately it collapsed. In some cities, rulers were killed. In others, they fled. In many, they simply vanished from the archaeological record. By 900 CE, the classic Maya kingship was no more. Cultural fragmentation and civic abandonment. With kings gone, cities had no unifying figure. Without the court, temples fell silent. Without tribute, infrastructure decayed. People began leaving the great centers, not in panicked mass exodus, but in measured, quiet departure. Some moved to smaller settlements. Some joined rival cities still holding on. Others returned to farming villages, far from the ruins of failed dynasties. In many places, the monuments simply stop. Stelae that once recorded coronations and victories now stand blank. Altars, once sites of ceremony, are found buried in collapsed debris or ritually broken, perhaps by those who once worshipped there. The ghosts of kings. Today, we wander through Tikal, through Copan, through Palenque, and marvel at their scale, their vision, their sacred architecture. But what we see are not cities. They are the skeletons of an abandoned order. Their plazas are empty. Their temples are roofless. Their hieroglyphs speak of greatness, then and in silence. The kings are gone, not defeated by an outside force, but consumed by the system they themselves created. The limits of divine power. The collapse of Maya political structures forces us to reconsider what power really means. These rulers built a world on divine narratives, on ritual, astrology, warfare, and tribute. But when environmental, economic, and social pressures rose, belief alone could not hold it together. The gods could not bring rain. The glyphs could not feed the hungry. And blood, once thought to appease the heavens, only deepened the crisis. The Maya system was brilliant, but brittle. And in the end, it shattered under its own weight. A warning in the stones. The story of political disintegration in the Maya world is not just a tale of ancient kings and jungle cities. It's a story of how institutions fail, of what happens when those in power cling to ritual instead of reform, when leaders lose the trust of their people, when systems are too rigid to bend and so they break. We see echoes of it across history. Rome, the Khmer, the Abbasid Caliphate. Civilizations built on centralized power often collapse not because of one event, but because of an accumulation of small, systemic failures. The Maya collapse was not just about rain or soil. It was about trust, legitimacy, and the fragility of human systems. Even the divine can fall. Even kings can be forgotten. Even the most enduring myths can collapse beneath the weight of reality.
They carved mountains into temples, raised cities from jungle floor, aligned the heavens with stone and ritual. But beneath the grandeur, there were cracks. Cracks not in the temples, but in the society that built them. Cracks that widened as food ran short, as droughts stretched on, and kings failed to deliver the blessings they promised. And at the base of it all, supporting the palaces, feeding the elite, building the monuments, were the people. Farmers, laborers, craftsmen, servants. The ones who did not write the glyphs, but lived the burdens behind them. And one day, some of them stopped believing. The silent majority. The Maya world dazzles us with the legacy of its elite, kings draped in jade, priests charting the heavens, scribes painting gods on ceramic vessels. But for every noble, there were hundreds, perhaps thousands, of commoners whose lives were consumed by labor, ritual obligation, and survival. The power of the Maya state relied on these people. It was they who built pyramids with hand-hewn limestone. They who carried stones, cooked for the elite, farmed on terraced hillsides, and paid taxes in maize, textiles, and blood. But theirs was a precarious existence. The social pyramid, like the temples they raised, was steep, and those at the bottom carried the most weight. Inequity in the classic Maya world.
Inequality was built into the Maya system. It was ritualized, normalized, even sanctified by religion. The elite claimed divine ancestry, linking themselves to gods and legendary ancestors. Their privileges were inherited, their status protected by tradition and cosmic order. Commoners, on the other hand, had no such divine lineage. They were born to serve, to toil, to support the divine mission of the state. Archaeological evidence shows a sharp contrast. Elite households with multi-room stone structures, exotic goods, and elite ceramics, while commoners lived in modest wattle and daub huts with little material wealth.
This inequality wasn't just economic, it was ritual. The elites monopolized access to the gods. Only priests and nobles could conduct the sacred ceremonies. Only they could interpret the calendar, perform sacrifices, commune with the spirits. To the Maya, this arrangement wasn't unfair, it was the way of the cosmos. But when that cosmos stopped working, when crops failed and gods grew silent, questions arose. Overburdened populations. As cities grew during the late Classic period, so did the demands placed on commoners. Tribute requirements rose, labor obligations increased, fields were worked harder, longer, with less margin for failure. And then came the droughts. The maize harvests began to decline. Reservoirs emptied, disease followed hunger, and still the obligations remained. Some were called to build, others were called to war. Some were called to give offerings, food, labor, even their children. But there was only so much a population could give before the foundation of society itself began to tremble. Signs of discontent. We can't read the thoughts of the ancient Maya peasants. They left behind no written records, no manifestos, no declarations of revolt. And yet, the archaeological silence is loud. In many sites, the final layers tell a different story than the polished glyphs and monuments above them. Buildings left unfinished, altars defaced, royal portraits smashed or buried face down. In some cities, temples show signs of being systematically dismantled, stones pulled down, ceremonial items broken and discarded. This wasn't just decay, it was rejection. A quiet, powerful refusal to carry on a system that no longer served the people. Peasant revolt? Could the Maya collapse have included revolts from below? Some scholars believe so. While outright rebellion may not have looked like modern revolution, there are signs that the common population pushed back through desertion, sabotage, or outright resistance. The idea of peasant revolt is supported by sudden elite flight from key sites, burned palaces, and scattered ceremonial caches that suggest abrupt abandonment. The destruction wasn't just due to enemy invasion. In many places, it appears internal, coming from within the same communities once ruled by divine kings. The people may not have risen up in armies, but they did rise up by walking away. Loss of faith in the sacred order. When your king is divine and he fails, what happens to belief itself? The Maya worldview was tightly woven. Religion, politics, and nature were inseparable. If one thread came undone, the entire tapestry began to fray. When the rain stopped, when crops withered, when war ravaged cities, the logical conclusion within the Maya cosmology was that the gods had turned away, or the rulers had failed them. And if the ruler failed the gods, what authority did he have left? This is perhaps the most profound shift of all, not just the loss of cities or kings, but the loss of meaning. Ceremonial centers, once vibrant with music, incense, and blood offerings, went silent. Ball courts became empty. Sacred caves were no longer visited. Even the calendar inscriptions, so central to Maya ritual life, stopped being carved. It's not just political collapse, it's a spiritual one. A civilization does not fall only when its buildings crumble. It falls when its people stop believing in the story that holds it together. Migration and abandonment. As the social order broke down, people didn't just die, they moved. They fled the lowlands, resettling in smaller villages, highlands, or northern cities like Uxmal and Chichen Itza, where water was more reliable and elite systems were more flexible. Some likely abandoned elite control entirely, returning to communal models of farming and governance. In these places, life continued, not as it once had, but simplified, localized, stripped of ceremony and statecraft. Civilization didn't vanish, it dispersed. Like river channels in a drought, it branched, forked, and found new paths through the land. Echoes of collapse. Today, the collapse of the classic Maya serves not only as a historical puzzle, but as a human story of resilience and reckoning. It reminds us that collapse is rarely a single event. It is a chain reaction. Environmental strain, political dysfunction, each link weakening the next. The Maya elite lost their thrones, but the commoners? They found a way to survive. They adapted, moved, endured. Their languages are still spoken, their traditions still practiced. They didn't disappear, they changed. But the world they built together, with its celestial cycles, blood-stained altars, and divine kings, was gone. Not just because of drought, not just because of war, but because the people stopped believing in the power that once ruled them. A civilization from below. As we walk through the ruins today, we must ask not just what the kings saw from their temples, but what the farmers felt in their fields. The collapse of the classic Maya world is not just a tale of palaces turned to dust. It is a story of what happens when inequality becomes unbearable, when institutions grow blind to the people who uphold them, when belief, stretched too far, finally breaks. In the silent plazas of Tikal, in the overgrown steppes of Copan, in the wind that moves through broken stones, the question still lingers. What happens when the many stop supporting the few? And what happens when the few no longer serve the many?
At the heart of the jungle, time stands still. Massive temples rise above the canopy. Stone glyphs whisper the names of kings long dead. Cities lie silent, abandoned, overgrown, forgotten by the people who once carved their greatness into the bones of the earth. For centuries, the question has loomed. What happened here? Why did the Maya, so advanced in astronomy, engineering, and governance, vanish from their great cities in the heart of the lowlands? Some have pointed to nature, others to rebellion and economic collapse. But another theory lingers like the shadow of a spear over the story of this lost empire: war, invasion, conquest. Was the Maya world brought down not by drought or discontent, but by violence? Theories of foreign invasion. The idea is ancient, almost as old as the ruins themselves. When early explorers stumbled upon the crumbling temples of Tikal and Copan in the 19th century, they imagined destruction by fire and sword. To them, only an outside force could have brought down such a civilization. Even today, some scholars propose that invading forces from beyond the Maya world, perhaps from central Mexico, may have played a role in the collapse. The Toltecs, the Putun Maya, the peoples of Teotihuacan, the Itza. Were outsiders the final blow to an already faltering system? Let's follow the evidence. Traces from the north, Teotihuacan influence. Centuries before the collapse, Maya cities had contact with Teotihuacan, the sprawling metropolis in the Valley of Mexico, home to the massive pyramid of the sun and moon. At Tikal, around 378 CE, a foreign general, possibly named Siashkak, arrived. He came not as an ambassador, but a conqueror. Within days, Tikal's king was dead. A new ruler, possibly with ties to Teotihuacan, was installed.
This wasn't just military occupation, it was cultural infusion. Teotihuacan's imagery, warfare symbolism, and even burial practices appeared across the Maya lowlands.
It wasn't a full-scale invasion, but it was a message. Foreign powers had the reach and ambition to shape Maya politics. Could something similar have happened during the collapse? Could waves of invaders from central Mexico have swept down, toppling kings, sacking cities, and ending the classic era? So far, the evidence is sparse. There are signs of influence in the north, especially at sites like Chichen Itza, where Toltec iconography appears centuries later. But in the central lowlands, where the collapse struck hardest, there's little to suggest organized conquest from outside. The ruins tell a different story. A more intimate violence, a civil war. Internal conflict, Maya against Maya. Warfare was nothing new to the Maya. For centuries, city-states had clashed over territory, trade routes, dynastic rivalry, and prestige. But during the late Classic period, this warfare escalated. Gone were the ritualized battles of the early centuries, carefully staged conflicts meant to capture nobles and reaffirm political order. In their place came siege, destruction, total war. At Dos Pilas, murals depict warriors ambushing their enemies in narrow ravines. At Aguateca, burned palaces show signs of a sudden and brutal attack. At Caracal, mass graves reveal hasty burials, possibly after slaughter. These were not isolated incidents. They were part of a pattern. City turned against city. Ally turned against ally, brothers against brothers. Competing city-states in turmoil. Consider the tangled relationships between some of the Maya world's most powerful cities. Tikal and Calakmul, two superpowers of the lowlands, fought a series of bitter wars spanning centuries. Their conflict engulfed dozens of smaller states, each choosing sides, each paying the price. When Caracal, once a client of Tikal, switched allegiances to Calakmul, it unleashed a wave of retaliatory strikes. Cities like Naranjo, Dos Pilas, and Yaxchilan were drawn into the vortex. The stelae and inscriptions become dense with war glyphs, captives, death, victory, sacrifice. The late classic Maya world, once balanced on diplomacy and ritual combat, now tore itself apart. And as warfare grew more destructive, it disrupted everything. Trade routes collapsed, agricultural zones were abandoned, elite lineages were extinguished. It was death by fragmentation. Archaeological evidence of widespread destruction. The ground tells its story in burned walls, smashed altars, and hastily abandoned homes. Excavations in cities like Aguateca, Dos Pilas, Ceibal, and Quirigua show signs of intense internal conflict. Many of these sites weren't slowly depopulated, they were attacked. In some, palaces were looted, fires burned hot enough to crack stone, and sacred objects were left shattered at the feet of toppled monuments. Even stelae, once meant to immortalize divine kings, were deliberately broken. In some cases, the heads of rulers were carved off, desecrated. This wasn't the result of natural decay or foreign invaders unfamiliar with Maya customs. This was targeted, intentional, internal. It was the Maya themselves, rulers, rivals, rebels, who tore down their own civilization. Civilization as a battleground. What happens when your rival knows your every weakness? When the roads between your cities carry not traders but armies? When the rituals meant to bring order become the very fuel for chaos? The Maya collapse wasn't just political or ecological. It was psychological. Imagine living in a time when no city was safe, where alliances meant little, where the gods remained silent and your king's palace had become a target. It's no wonder people fled. They didn't just leave behind temples, they left behind fear, conflict, a world that no longer made sense. The rise of fortress cities. In the final years before total abandonment, the surviving cities adapted. Places like Piedras Negras and Aguateca fortified their centers. Walls were built. Strategic locations, like cliffs and rivers, were used to defend against attack.
Some cities, once open ceremonial centers, became garrison strongholds. But this was no solution. It was survival. And it didn't last. Eventually, these cities fell too, either to siege, to rebellion, or simply to abandonment. There were no victors in this war, only ruins. The question of the Itza. One final thread of the invasion theory centers on the Itza, a Maya group originally from the central lowlands, who may have returned centuries later from the north. They founded cities like Chichen Itza, blending Maya and Toltec traditions. Some believe they were among those who returned to the Maya heartland in the wake of collapse, perhaps even taking over abandoned cities by force. But this came long after the classic Maya cities had already fallen silent. If the Itza were conquerors, they came to a kingdom already in ashes. Collapse without conquest. In the end, the evidence points not to a single grand invasion, but to many small wars, betrayals, and breaks in trust. It wasn't an external army that brought the Maya low. It was centuries of rivalry without resolution, of war without end, of power pursued without peace. It was city-states that could not unify, rulers who could not relinquish ambition, and the civilization that could not withstand the violence it unleashed upon itself. The most dangerous enemy. The Maya built great cities, but they never built an empire. No unifying government, no central authority to end the cycle of war. And so they remained fractured, vulnerable, great kings with small thrones, divine power diluted by rivalry and revenge. In the end, the enemy wasn't from the north. It wasn't a faceless invader in foreign armor. It was the system itself, the endless game of power, the worship of conquest. The Maya civilization collapsed not because it was weak, but because it was strong in too many places, for too long, without unity. The flames that consumed its cities were not foreign. They were lit by hands that once built temples. And that is perhaps the greatest tragedy of all. Across the ancient plazas, silence lingers. Stone temples rise like tombstones in a city without pulse. The jungle swallows causeways once filled with pilgrims. The air, once thick with incense and the chants of priest-kings, now hums only with the sound of insects and wind. We've seen the signs of war, of famine, of social unrest. But is it possible that the downfall of the Maya was also driven by a far more invisible force? Not swords, not drought, but something microscopic. An enemy too small to see and yet powerful enough to bring entire cities to their knees. Could the Maya have been undone by disease? The missing plague. When we study the fall of civilizations, from Rome to the Aztecs, disease often plays a key role. The plague of Justinian, the Black Death, the smallpox that rode with Spanish steel. But in the Maya world, no grand narrative of pestilence has been uncovered. No mass graves, no clear records, no definitive mention of plague in the surviving glyphs. And yet, we must ask, what if the evidence has simply faded with time? What if disease struck in ways more silent, more scattered, leaving behind not bones or texts, but only gaps? Empty cities, lost generations, collapsed structures left mid-construction. What if an epidemic, either native or foreign, was one of the final straws in a society already on the edge? Potential plagues in the Maya lowlands. We don't know the exact pathogens that may have circulated in the Maya world, but clues suggest the possibilities. Tropical lowland regions, hot, wet, dense with human and animal life, are ideal environments for disease.
Vector-borne illnesses such as malaria, dengue, and Chagas disease likely existed in the region. These would have been endemic, affecting populations for generations, flaring during wet seasons, and compounding periods of famine or displacement. Even intestinal parasites, spread through contaminated water or poor sanitation, could wreak havoc over time, especially as cities grew crowded and resources became scarce. And yet, these weren't new to the Maya. They were part of daily life. So what could have changed? Perhaps environmental degradation played a role. As deforestation and soil depletion progressed, so too did the risk of waterborne diseases. Runoff from eroded fields could contaminate sacred reservoirs. Overcrowding in cities already under siege by famine and conflict would only make the spread of illness faster and more fatal.
Imported diseases, the pre-Columbian controversy. There's a more controversial theory, one that rewrites the timeline. Could foreign diseases have arrived before the Spanish? The official history says no, that the Great Plagues, smallpox, measles, influenza, came with the European conquistadors in the early 1500s, centuries after the classic Maya collapse. And yet, some fringe theories persist. That indirect contact with transcontinental trade routes via the Caribbean or Gulf Coast could have carried pathogens inland, perhaps from early Old World African contact or through intermediary groups like the Potun Maya or early traders along the Isthmus of Panama. There is no concrete evidence of this, no genetic markers, no glyphic references, no biological traces in human remains. But if true, if even one Old World disease found its way into a dense, unexposed population, it would have been catastrophic. Even a single outbreak could destabilize an already weakened system. Modern parallels and lost evidence. Think about the pandemics of our own time. In mere months, a virus can circle the globe, bring megacities to a standstill, overwhelm hospitals, undermine governments. Now imagine a Maya city-state in the 800 CE. Tens of thousands of people crowded around a central reservoir, famine gnawing at their strength, warfare driving refugees into cities, crops failing, leaders uncertain. It wouldn't take a large outbreak, just enough. Just enough to empty markets, to silence priests, to kill farmers and scribes, to scare families into fleeing the cities and never returning. The kind of epidemic that leaves no grand record, only the absence of continuity. In the archaeological record, such events would be hard to trace. Ancient Maya did not keep written histories in bulk. Their glyphs were ceremonial, tied to elite lineages. They did not document common suffering, and their fragile organic remains, bones, tissues, even burial goods, often disintegrated in the humid lowland soil. We may never find the smoking gun of disease, but absence is not proof of health. It is simply silence. Nutrition and immune collapse. One clear factor does support a disease hypothesis: malnutrition. In the final centuries of the Classic period, nutritional stress was widespread. Bone studies show signs of anemia, stunted growth, and enamel hypoplasia, markers of childhood starvation or chronic vitamin deficiency. As maize yields dropped due to overfarming and drought, the poor suffered first. Malnourished populations have weakened immune systems, making them more vulnerable to both new and familiar diseases. Add to that the breakdown of clean water access, the stress of warfare, and the collapse of centralized authority, and you have a perfect storm for disease outbreaks. People may not have died of famine or war directly. They may have died of fevers, infections, and untreated injuries brought on by a collapsing society. Overpopulation in fragile environments. The classic Maya lowlands were densely populated, more than any tropical civilization of the ancient world.
In some regions, archaeologists estimate 600 to 1,000 people per square mile, comparable to modern-day rural towns. And these were not spread out evenly. They clustered around urban centers like Tikal, Copan, Caracal, and Palenque, drawing water from central reservoirs, importing food from increasingly distant farms. Overpopulation stretched systems thin. In years of abundance, it worked. But when rainfall declined, or crops failed, or trade routes were disrupted, there was no buffer. Diseases spread faster in tight quarters. In towns with failing sanitation, no garbage removal, and compromised food storage, small outbreaks could become local disasters. And without a functioning elite to organize response, there was no recovery. Fear, flight, and social fragmentation. In the face of illness, communities often respond not with unity, but with flight. Families may abandon homes. Entire districts might depopulate as rumors spread of death and contagion. This is human behavior, echoed across centuries and continents. Could the Maya have done the same? We know they left their cities. That great centers like Copan, Quirigua, and Piedras Negras were abandoned in waves. That ceremonial centers stopped being used. That burials declined and construction halted. It's possible they didn't just leave because of hunger or war, but because the air itself felt cursed. In some sites, hastily sealed doorways, isolated graves, and evidence of sudden migration hint at communities on the run. Not just from enemies, but from something they couldn't see. The spiritual response to disease. If a mysterious illness struck the Maya, how would they have interpreted it? To the Maya, sickness wasn't purely physical, it was spiritual. It meant imbalance, disfavor with the gods, the intrusion of malevolent spirits. Priests would have performed rituals, blood would have been offered, ceremonies intensified. And when nothing worked, when the deaths continued, people might have concluded that the gods had turned their backs. This loss of faith, when combined with famine, warfare, and leadership collapse, would have been devastating. In a society where religion was woven into daily life, illness without explanation could trigger existential panic. When even the priest-kings could not stop the suffering, the entire framework of belief may have begun to crack. A silent killer among many. Disease may not have been the sole cause of the Maya collapse, but it may have been a multiplier, a final accelerant to a society already straining at the seams. No invader needed, no earthquake, no single act of betrayal. Just an illness, a fever, a cough, a wound that never healed. Repeated 1,000 times over, until the cities emptied. The priests gave no answers, and the jungle began to reclaim what had once been sacred. An invisible ending. In the end, the mystery remains. We have no epidemic carved in stone, no glyph for plague. But perhaps that's fitting, because sometimes collapse is not a shout, but a whisper. A breath that stops, a fire that dims, a people who simply vanish, not in battle, but in silence. We often imagine the Maya collapse as a moment, a singular, catastrophic event, a night when the cities went dark, the people disappeared, and silence fell over the jungle like a curtain. But reality, as it so often does, resists the simplicity of myth. The Maya civilization did not vanish overnight. Its fall was not sudden, but staggered. Its silence did not come all at once, but in waves, region by region, generation by generation. And perhaps most importantly, not all Maya cities collapsed at all. The story is not one of death, but transformation. This is the truth behind the myth of overnight. The seduction of simplicity. Narratives crave drama. We want a sudden downfall, a lost city swallowed whole, an empire blinking out like a dying star. But the Maya world was never a monolith.
It was not a single empire, but a constellation of independent city-states, each with its own rulers, alliances, enemies, and destinies. What collapsed in one region continued in another. What faded in the lowlands flourished in the highlands. Some cities died out in decades, others endured for centuries. So when we say the collapse, we are using a convenient word for a far more complex process. It is not a line drawn across a timeline. It is a mosaic of endings and survivals. Southern lowlands, the heart that broke first. Most of the dramatic images of the Maya collapse come from the southern lowlands, the region that once held the towering cities of Tikal, Copan, Palenque, and Calakmul. These were the jewels of the Classic period, flourishing between 250 and 900 CE. Their kings traced divine bloodlines. Their architects raised massive temples above the jungle canopy. Their scribes etched cosmic histories into stone. And then, almost inexplicably, they began to fall. Construction stopped, monuments ceased, populations plummeted. By the 9th century, cities like Tikal were emptying. By the early 10th, Copan had gone quiet. To the outside observer, it felt sudden. To those living through it, it may have felt like the slow unraveling of everything once believed eternal. But while the southern heartland was breaking, other regions were only beginning to stir.
Northern lowlands, the torch passed on. Far to the north, in the Yucatan Peninsula, the collapse looked very different. Cities like Uxmal, Caba, and most famously Chichen Itza rose to prominence just as the southern capitals were falling. From roughly 800 to 1200 CE, the north entered a vibrant renaissance. Chichen Itza, with its iconic Pyramid of Kukulkan, became one of the largest and most influential cities in Mesoamerica. Its architectural style blended traditional Maya elements with foreign influences, evidence of trade and contact with distant peoples. Inscriptions and carvings from this period depict conquest and ceremony, diplomacy and expansion. This was no dark age. It was a new dawn, lit by northern fires. The collapse clearly was not uniform. It was not the end of the Maya story, just the end of one chapter. Highlands and the Maya continuity. Further south and inland, in the Guatemalan highlands, Maya culture endured with remarkable tenacity. Cities like Cumarcaj, Iximche, and Zaculé remained vibrant centers of Maya life well into the 15th century. Even as Spanish ships landed on Caribbean shores, these communities maintained their traditions, languages, and governance structures. They built in stone. They prayed to the old gods. They farmed the steep mountain terraces and passed stories from one generation to the next. To them, the Classic collapse was not a cataclysm. It was a change, one of many that their people had weathered before. This continuity would prove critical. When the Spanish finally arrived, they did not find ruins. They found kingdoms. The Maya were not gone. They had moved, adapted, evolved. A collapse measured in centuries. So how long did the collapse take? That depends on where you stood. In Petén, the core of the classic southern cities, abandonment accelerated between 800 and 900 CE. In northern Yucatan, the apex of Chichen Itza lasted into the early 1200s. In the Guatemalan highlands, city-states thrived into the 1500s. Even within single regions, cities declined at different rates. Some fell due to war, others due to drought. Some were slowly abandoned, others violently destroyed. There was no single moment, no shared calendar date when the Maya world ended. It was a constellation of collapses, some sudden, some slow, some still debated.
Archaeology corrects the myth. Why, then, does the idea of an overnight collapse persist? Partly, it's the silence left in the archaeological record. When inscriptions stop, when buildings are abandoned, it feels like a vanishing, a breath held and never exhaled.
But modern archaeology paints a more textured picture. LiDAR scanning reveals new settlement patterns, indicating migration, not annihilation. Pollen records show phased environmental stress, not abrupt disaster. Radiocarbon dating of bones and ceramics tells a story not of a people gone, but of a people moving, changing, adapting. There was chaos, yes. There was collapse, certainly. But there was also resilience. And above all, time. The fall of the Maya classic world took place not in a moment, but across generations. Survivors, not ghosts. The Maya people did not disappear. This cannot be said enough. Today, more than 7 million Maya live in Mexico, Guatemala, Belize, and Honduras. They speak dozens of distinct languages. They farm, they teach, they protest, they celebrate, they resist. They still honor the sacred calendar. They still practice ancient rituals. They still remember. To say that the Maya vanished is not just incorrect, it is a disservice to their survival. Yes, their cities crumbled. Yes, their gods were silenced by colonial violence. Yes, the jungle reclaimed the roads of kings. But the people, their descendants, remain, and their story continues. Southern collapse, northern flowering. Let us return to geography, to the division between south and north. What happened in the southern lowlands was unprecedented. A wholesale population decline, abandonment of city-states, collapse of dynasties. But in the Puk region of the north, there was innovation, new construction, artistic flourishing. And in the coastal cities of Cozumel, Tulum, and Mayapan, trade networks reached out across the sea. This split between regions reveals the truth behind the myth. The collapse was not the end of Maya civilization, but the end of a political and ceremonial order rooted in the southern heartland. It was a fall, yes, but also a shift, a redirection, a reorganization, a rebirth. The importance of complexity. History resists simplification. The Maya world was vast, culturally, geographically, and politically. It cannot be boxed into a single narrative of rise and fall. There were cycles. There were revivals. There was continuity beneath the collapse. Understanding this does not make the Maya story less fascinating. It makes it more human. Because true collapses are not lightning strikes. They are slow-moving earthquakes. They rumble across decades. They fracture structures long before they fall. They are felt before they are seen. From endings to echoes. As we walk the ruins of Tikal or stand before the shadows of Palenque, it is tempting to mourn, to imagine a world lost. But listen closer. You will hear not silence, but echoes. Not ghosts, but descendants. Not an empire that vanished overnight, but a civilization that adapted, fractured, re-emerged, and endured. The Maya did not disappear. They transformed. And the myth of overnight is just that, a myth.
When the great cities of the southern lowlands fell silent, many believed it marked the end of the Maya, a civilization spent, a torch extinguished. But in the north, the embers still burned. Even as Tikal and Copan crumbled into the embrace of the jungle, the Yucatan Peninsula lit up with new life. A new era emerged, the post-classic period, stretching roughly from 900 to 1500 CE. It was a time of migration, innovation, and resilience. And at the heart of this resurgence stood a city that would come to rival any that had come before, Chichen Itza. A shift in the wind. As southern cities declined, families, elites, artisans, and farmers moved northward. They brought with them the memories of old kingdoms and the technologies of a once golden age. The lush jungles of Petén gave way to the drier plains of the Yucatan, a region of thinner soil, fewer rivers, and unique challenges. Yet the Maya adapted, again.
Instead of towering mountain cities, they built low-lying ceremonial centers over massive underground reservoirs, cenotes, natural sinkholes that provided fresh water in an otherwise arid land. This was the canvas for the next chapter in Maya history. This was where Chichen Itza would rise. Chichen Itza, City of the Serpent. By the early 10th century, Chichen Itza had grown into a political and spiritual giant. Its name means at the mouth of the well of the Itza, a reference to the sacred cenote sagrado, where rituals, offerings, and sacrifices were made to the gods. But Chichen Itza was more than a religious center. It was a metropolis, a trading hub, and a beacon of innovation. Its architecture stunned the world. The Pyramid of Kukulkan, or El Castillo, dominates the city's center. With its 4 staircases and 365 steps, doubles as a calendar. During the spring and autumn equinoxes, shadows cast by the pyramid create the illusion of a serpent slithering down the staircase, honoring the feathered serpent god Kukulkan, known elsewhere in Mesoamerica as Quetzalcoatl. This city pulsed with vitality. It was a melting pot, and its grandeur hinted at something unusual, a fusion of civilizations. The Toltec influence. Around the same time that Chichen Itza was rising, another power ruled far to the west, Tula, capital of the Toltec civilization. The Toltecs were warlike, expansionist, and steeped in complex spiritual traditions. Their presence reached deep into central Mexico, and some scholars believe they extended their influence either through trade, diplomacy, or conquest all the way to the Maya north. At Chichen Itza, we see Toltec fingerprints. The Temple of the Warriors bristles with carved columns depicting armed figures, reminiscent of Toltec art from Tula. The Chacmol statues, reclining stone figures with bowls on their stomachs for offerings or sacrifices, are also thought to be of Toltec origin. Even the emphasis on human sacrifice, less common in earlier Maya tradition, becomes more pronounced in this era, aligning with Toltec ritual practices. Whether through conquest or cultural osmosis, a hybrid civilization emerged. Maya artistry blended with Toltec martial symbolism. Maya cosmology met Toltec mythology. The result was something entirely new and entirely powerful.
A trade empire. Chichen Itza wasn't just built on blood and belief, it thrived on commerce. The city became the centerpiece of an expansive trade network that stretched across Mesoamerica. From the Gulf Coast to the highlands of Guatemala, obsidian, cacao, feathers, salt, jade, and cotton flowed through its markets. Merchants, known as polum, were both traders and diplomats. They were the lifeblood of the economy and the veins that connected city-states across the Yucatan. The reach of Chichen Itza was so vast that some scholars describe it not as a city-state, but as an empire in all but name. A multicultural city. The grandeur of Chichen Itza was not just in its buildings, but in its people. It was a cosmopolitan center where Maya, Toltec, and other Mesoamerican cultures mingled. The result was a vibrant blend of language, custom, belief, and technology. Ceramics from Veracruz, stonework influenced by Oaxaca, even some elements from as far south as the Pacific coast. Chichen Itza was no longer just Maya. It was pan-Mesoamerican. It was a crossroads of civilizations. The shadow of violence. But beneath the wealth and diversity, shadows lengthened. The blend of cultures brought not only prosperity, but tension. Archaeological evidence suggests that human sacrifice, particularly at the sacred cenote, became increasingly central. Skeletal remains show signs of trauma. Offerings included gold, jade, and even children. Power was maintained not just through diplomacy, but through spectacle, fear, and ritualized violence.
Temples and ball courts weren't merely places of worship or sport. They were theaters of blood, where losing players might be sacrificed to the gods, and where leaders demonstrated divine power through acts of ritual death. This fusion of belief and brutality echoes Toltec ideology and may have contributed to the city's eventual downfall. The rise of Mayapan. By the late 12th century, Chichen Itza's power began to wane. Exactly why remains a mystery. Some suggest internal conflict. Others believe environmental factors or shifts in trade routes destabilized the city. Whatever the cause, the vacuum left behind was quickly filled. A new city rose, Mayapan. Founded by the Kokum dynasty, Mayapan attempted to recreate the glory of Chichen Itza, even copying many of its architectural styles. But it was a different kind of city. Smaller, more compact, more authoritarian. Where Chichen Itza had been a loose alliance of elites, Mayapan enforced tight central control, complete with walls and a standing army. From the 1200s to the 1400s, it dominated the northern Yucatan. It became the political capital of a confederation of Maya cities, some willingly, others not. This was the final phase of Maya power before the arrival of Europeans. The last glimmers. Mayapan's reign ended in fire and betrayal. In the mid-15th century, internal rebellion, fueled by rival lineages, led to the city's violent destruction. The Confederation collapsed. The Yucatan fragmented once more into dozens of competing city-states. But even this was not the end. When the Spanish arrived in the early 1500s, they did not find ruins. They found a living, breathing civilization. Cities like Tulum and Uxmal still functioned. Trade still flowed. Priests still performed sacred rites. The Maya were not a shadow of the past. They were very much present. And it was only through guns, steel, and disease that this vibrant world was finally brought to its knees.
Legacy of the Northern Resurgence. Chichen Itza and Mayapan stand as testaments to Maya resilience. They prove that collapse is not an end, but a transformation. That a people can fall, rise, and fall again, and still endure. The Northern Resurgence was not just a second wind, it was a reinvention. New forms of governance, new religious practices, new alliances and identities. The blending of Maya and Toltec cultures created something greater than the sum of its parts, a synthesis of worlds. And while these cities eventually fell, their legacies live on in stone, in language, and in the hearts of the millions of Maya descendants who still walk this land. The Maya story is not a straight line. It is a spiral, winding through time, always returning, always changing. From the ashes of the classic collapse rose something new, not lesser, not forgotten, just different. By the early 1500s, the great stone cities of the Maya had long since surrendered their glory to the jungle. Vines wrapped around temple walls, saibas split stone with roots that groped for the past. But the people? They had not disappeared. In the highlands of Guatemala, on the limestone plateaus of the Yucatan, across forests and valleys, the Maya lived. They farmed, they traded, they worshipped, they remembered. What the outside world saw as a lost civilization was, in truth, a civilization transformed. And then, another world arrived. The Spanish Conquest. First contact. The first recorded encounter between the Spanish and the Maya occurred in 1502, when Christopher Columbus's fourth voyage intercepted a large Maya trading canoe off the coast of present-day Honduras. Inside were goods, cotton, cacao, copper bells, and finely crafted weapons. Here was a glimpse of a sophisticated people still very much alive. Less than 2 decades later, the Spanish would return, this time not as explorers, but as conquerors.
In 1517, Francisco Hernández de Córdoba landed on the shores of the Yucatan. His men were the first Europeans to set foot in Maya territory. They expected gold. They found arrows. The Maya, unlike many other indigenous groups, did not collapse at the first sight of Europeans. They fought, and they fought hard. Fragmented but fierce. By the 16th century, the Maya civilization was politically fragmented. Unlike the centralized Aztec Empire with its towering capital of Tenochtitlan, the Maya were divided into dozens of independent city-states and polities, each with its own king, its own military, its own rivalries. To the Spanish, this decentralization seemed like weakness. In reality, it was a kind of resilience. The Maya had centuries of experience navigating alliances, betrayals, and warfare. They had survived droughts, collapse, and reinvention. The Spanish would be just another storm to weather. But the storm would be relentless. The fall of the Highland Kingdoms. In 1524, Spanish conquistador Pedro de Alvarado, under the orders of Hernán Cortés, marched into the Guatemalan highlands. His campaign was brutal and fast. The great Maya kingdom of the Quiché was among the first to fall. Its capital, Cumarcash, once a proud and fortified city, was burned to the ground. But even in defeat, the Maya fought back. In one infamous battle, the Caquil Maya lured Spanish forces into a trap, nearly wiping out an entire battalion. Other groups used guerrilla tactics, leveraging their deep knowledge of the terrain. These were not submissive victims. These were warriors, fighting not just for land, but for identity, for memory, for the gods.
The Yucatan Campaign. While the highlands fell under Spanish rule in the 1520s, the Yucatan would prove far more difficult. For over 170 years, the Spanish struggled to conquer the northern lowlands. They came with steel and muskets, horses and disease, but they were met with bows, blowguns, ambushes, and an unbreakable will. Cities like Tayasal and Noche-Petén, located on islands in Lake Chichen Itza, resisted for generations. In fact, the last independent Maya kingdom, the Itza, held out until 1697, over 150 years after the fall of the Aztecs. It took a fleet of Spanish ships, artillery, and a full-scale siege to bring them down. Think of that. In an age of empires, one of the last to fall was a city in the jungle, defended by a people who refused to forget who they were. Weapons of conquest. The Maya didn't lose because they lacked courage. They lost because the tools of war had changed. Spanish swords sliced through wooden clubs. Guns shattered lines before they could close. And disease, silent, invisible, did more than armies ever could. Smallpox, measles, influenza. They arrived with the Spanish and spread like fire through Maya communities. Entire villages vanished without a battle. Some scholars estimate that up to 90% of the indigenous population of Mesoamerica perished from disease alone. The Maya world didn't just collapse, it hemorrhaged. But it never bled dry. Spiritual resistance. As cities fell and kings were executed, the Spanish turned their attention to the soul. Missionaries arrived by the hundreds, Franciscans, Dominicans, Jesuits. Their mission? To convert the Maya to Christianity. Temples were destroyed, idols burned, books, those precious codices, were reduced to ash. Only a handful survive today, the rest lost forever. Yet, beneath the surface, the Maya found ways to preserve their beliefs. They blended Christian saints with their ancestral gods. They embedded their cosmology into the stories and practices of Catholicism. The cross, long a Christian symbol, was already sacred to the Maya. It represented the world tree, the axis between the heavens, the earth, and the underworld. And so, in churches built with the stones of their temples, they continued their prayers, in a different language, to different names, but with the same heartbeat.
Rebellions and revolts. Subjugation did not mean surrender. Throughout the colonial period, the Maya staged dozens of revolts. One of the most powerful came in 1847, long after independence from Spain. The caste war of Yucatan began as a rebellion against economic exploitation, land theft, and racial inequality. It became a full-scale war between the indigenous Maya and the Mexican state. For decades, the Maya held vast territories, established their own governments, and repelled Mexican forces. At one point, they even received weapons from the British. It wasn't until the early 20th century, over 400 years after the conquest, that the region was fully reintegrated. Even then, resistance never truly ended. The Maya today. And so, we arrive at the present. Walk the streets of San Cristobal, Palenque, or Chichicastenango, and you'll hear it. The Maya language, still spoken by over 6 million people across Mexico, Guatemala, Belize, and Honduras. Visit a highland market and you'll see it, the weavings with patterns older than the pyramids. Join a village ceremony and you'll feel it, the cosmos still alive in ritual and rhythm. The Maya did not vanish. They survived enslavements, epidemics, forced labor, cultural suppression, and civil war. They endured colonization and exploitation. And through it all, they remembered. The Popol Vuh, their sacred book, tells us, "We are people made of maize." And maize, like the Maya, is resilient. Legacy and memory. Today, archaeologists continue to uncover secrets buried in the jungles, temples swallowed by trees, tombs of kings, inscriptions on stone. Each discovery deepens the story. But perhaps the most important chapter isn't written in glyphs or carved in limestone. It's written in the faces of the people, in the songs, the stories, the dances, the resistance. The Maya story is not a tragedy. It is a testament to endurance, to adaptation, to identity. And while the empires they built may lie in ruins, their spirit continues, alive in a million hearts, pulsing beneath the surface, whispering truths older than time. Because the Maya never vanished. They are still here, and they always have been.
Deep in the jungles of Central America, beneath the emerald canopy of mahogany and ceiba, time had grown quiet. Temples rose like forgotten mountains. Palaces crumbled beneath vines. Stone faces, once fierce and proud, stared silently from moss-covered walls. For centuries, the cities of the ancient Maya slumbered in the undergrowth, unknown, unvisited, nearly lost to memory. But stone, unlike flesh, endures. And one by one, these cities began to speak again. This is the story of rediscovery. A glimpse through the leaves. In the early 19th century, long before satellites or LiDAR scans, long before carbon dating or aerial drones, the jungle still held its secrets. But curiosity, human curiosity, has a way of cutting through even the thickest foliage. In 1839, American diplomat and explorer John Lloyd Stephens, accompanied by English artist Frederick Catherwood, set out on a journey through Honduras, Guatemala, and southern Mexico. What they found shocked the Western world. Hidden among the trees were cities, massive stone cities, with towering pyramids, carved lintels, intricate facades. These were not the ruins of savages, as many had assumed. These were the remnants of an advanced and sophisticated civilization. Catherwood's detailed drawings, rendered with architectural precision, revealed the astonishing complexity of Maya art and engineering. When Stephens published Incidents of Travel in Central America, Chiapas, and Yucatan, the world was stunned. For the first time, the grandeur of the Maya reached European salons and American parlors. Suddenly, the New World didn't seem so new. Its ancient past was deeper than anyone had imagined. A civilization reimagined. In the decades that followed, adventurers, scholars, and archaeologists poured into the jungles. Tikal, Copan, Palenque,
Uxmal, Calakmul, Yaxchilan. Each name marked not just a site, but a rediscovered voice in the long-lost symphony of the Maya. But these were not just piles of rock. They were cities with sacred plazas, towering temples, astronomical observatories, and ball courts echoing with ghosts. As excavation teams cleared brush and debris, the Maya world began to take shape. They revealed not a single civilization, but a constellation of city-states, each with its own art, politics, and destiny. By the early 20th century, the field of Maya archaeology had taken root, though the path to understanding would be long and winding. The stone language speaks again. Perhaps the greatest mystery of the Maya world was not its writing. Throughout their ruins were thousands of glyphs, elaborate carvings of symbols and faces, serpents and hands, moons and flames. For over a century, scholars puzzled over them. Some dismissed them as mere decoration. Others thought they recorded only astronomical cycles or religious myths. But they were wrong. These were words, sentences, names, dates, deeds, histories. In the mid-20th century, breakthroughs in decipherment began to occur. Scholars like Tatiana Proskoryakov, Yuri Knorosov, and Linda Shell slowly cracked the code. What emerged was stunning. A record of kings and queens, wars and rituals, births and deaths, alliances and betrayals. The stones were telling stories, long-forgotten tales now roaring back to life. Thanks to this decipherment, we now know the names of rulers like Pakal the Great of Palenque, Yikin Khan Kawil of Tikal, and Yaxkukmo of Copan. We can read the Maya's own accounts of their history, etched into stela, painted in murals, inscribed on bones. Each inscription, each symbol, peels back another layer of the mystery.
Modern tools, ancient secrets. Today, the rediscovery continues, faster and more astonishing than ever. With the use of LiDAR, a revolutionary remote sensing technology, archaeologists can map what the jungle hides without lifting a shovel. In 2018, a LiDAR survey in northern Guatemala stunned the world. Beneath the dense forest canopy, researchers revealed over 60,000 previously unknown structures, homes, causeways, terraces, fortifications. Suddenly, cities once thought to house thousands were revealed to have supported millions. The Maya world had not been a scattered collection of small towns. It was a networked, interdependent, heavily populated civilization of staggering scale. What had once been invisible now emerged in astonishing detail. And the question returned: how could such an immense, complex world unravel? What the ruins reveal. Excavation is more than digging, it's reading. A partially buried staircase might suggest a temple hastily abandoned. A cracked altar might show signs of ritual defacement. Skeletons found in mass graves might whisper of war, of disease, of desperation. In Copan, archaeologists unearthed elaborate tombs beneath temples, revealing generations of kings whose power rested, quite literally, on the bones of their ancestors. In Tikal, layers of construction and abrupt halts in building projects show signs of instability, perhaps famine, perhaps war. In the Petix-Batun region of Guatemala, defensive walls surround once thriving cities, evidence of siege warfare and growing insecurity in the final days before collapse. Each site, each trench, each artifact is a clue, but the mystery remains incomplete. Because the Maya didn't leave a single explanation. No written account of why their cities emptied. No declaration carved in stone. Instead, we are left with fragments, partial truths, and scattered echoes. The enduring puzzle. Why did the Maya collapse? Environmental degradation? Prolonged drought? Political breakdown? Rebellion? Disease? A perfect storm of pressures? The evidence points to all of the above,
A slow-motion collapse playing out over decades, even centuries. Not a fall, but a fraying. Some cities declined quickly. Others lingered on. Some reinvented themselves. Others were reborn elsewhere. And even after the so-called collapse, the Maya story continued. In the north, in the highlands, in the hearts of the people. The ruins don't give us one answer. They give us 1,000 questions. A world reclaimed. Today, the jungles are still reclaiming the stones. Every rainy season, moss creeps back over glyphs. Roots widen ancient cracks. Birds nest in crevices once lit by sacred fires. But the Maya world is no longer silent. Tourists walk the plazas. Scholars translate the texts. Local Maya communities reclaim their heritage. Temples that once groaned under vines now shine under sunlight. In Guatemala, Belize, Honduras, and Mexico, archaeological parks serve not just as attractions, but as acts of remembrance. Because these ruins are more than ancient cities. They are monuments to memory, to complexity, to resilience. Every stone tells a story, and every story leads to another. What remains? The Maya taught us how to track the stars, how to measure time, how to build cities in harmony with the earth and sky. They taught us about the limits of power, the dangers of hubris, the fragility of greatness. And they remind us that even the mightiest civilizations are not immune to collapse, but that collapse is not the same as disappearance. The stones still stand, the stories still echo, the people still live. What remains is more than ruin. What remains is legacy.
The story of the Maya did not end with the fall of their cities. It did not vanish with the collapse of dynasties, or the crumbling of pyramids, or the silence that spread across once thriving ceremonial centers. The story continued, quietly, resiliently, in the hearts of the people who never left. This is not a tale of extinction. It is a story of survival. And the legacy of the Maya is not buried in the jungle. It is alive. The living Maya. Today, over 7 million Maya people live across Mexico, Guatemala, Belize, Honduras, and El Salvador. They speak more than 30 distinct Maya languages, living tongues descended from those carved in glyphs 1,000 years ago. Languages like Quiche, Yucatec, Chekchi, Mam, and Tzotzil are still spoken in markets, kitchens, and classrooms. Each is a vessel of memory, carrying oral histories, traditional knowledge, and worldview. Maya communities maintain rich traditions in weaving, farming, healing, and spirituality. In highland villages, women still craft huipiles, traditional blouses embroidered with sacred cosmology. Farmers still plant maize, the crop at the heart of the Maya creation story, using ancient techniques tied to lunar cycles and soil wisdom. Midwives, herbalists, and daykeepers hold knowledge passed down through generations, unwritten but deeply remembered. Maya spirituality endures as well. Though many communities adopted Catholicism under colonial rule, indigenous belief systems persist, often blended in complex syncretic forms. Sacred caves are still visited. Ceremonies still honor the gods of rain, corn, fire, and time. The 260-day ritual calendar, the Tzolkin, is still used in some regions to guide decisions, heal the sick, and name the newborn. The Maya world never vanished. It simply transformed. Contributions that shaped the world. Though much was forgotten or buried, the achievements of the ancient Maya echo far beyond the jungle. They were among the first in the world to understand and use the concept of zero, not just as a placeholder, but as a mathematical idea. This innovation, centuries ahead of its time in Europe, allowed for astonishing precision in astronomy and architecture. Their calendar system, an intricate web of interlocking cycles, tracked lunar phases, solar years, Venus's movements, and ritual time. With it, they could predict eclipses, plan planting seasons, and synchronize religious festivals across vast distances.
The Maya long count calendar, which famously reached the end of a major cycle in 2012, was never a prophecy of doom. It was a celebration of time's eternal return, a cosmic reset, not an apocalypse. In astronomy, the Maya charted celestial bodies with stunning accuracy, without the aid of telescopes. Observatories like the Caracol at Chichen Itza were aligned with solstices, equinoxes, and planetary risings. Their understanding of Venus cycles rivaled that of the Babylonians. In architecture, they mastered corbelled arches, load-bearing designs, and city planning in harmony with sacred geography. Cities like Tikal and Copan weren't built randomly. They were designed according to cosmological principles, aligning sky and earth, myth and mortar. And in writing, their glyphic system, a blend of phonetics and logograms, was one of the most sophisticated in the ancient world. Now largely deciphered, it allows us to hear their voices once again. Through their achievements, the Maya remind us what human ingenuity can accomplish, without metal tools, without beasts of burden, without the wheel. They remind us that brilliance is not bound by modernity.
Lessons from collapse. But perhaps the most enduring legacy of the Maya lies not in what they built, but in what they endured. Their collapse, as we've seen, was not simple. It was not sudden. It was not singular. It was a slow unraveling, a civilization pushed to the brink by environmental degradation, overpopulation, climate change, political fragmentation, and social unrest. Does this sound familiar? Today, as we face rising seas, disappearing forests, vanishing species, and fracturing societies, the Maya collapse is not just a historical curiosity. It is a mirror. It shows us what happens when a society grows beyond its limits, when short-term gains override long-term survival, when elite competition eclipses collective well-being, when nature's warning signs go unheeded. The Maya cut down their forests to make lime plaster for their cities. In doing so, they exposed soil, altered rainfall, and triggered erosion. They pushed agriculture to its limits. When droughts came, the system couldn't hold. It was not a single mistake, but the compounding of many. And yet, the Maya are still here. That too is the lesson. Collapse is not the end of a people. It is a transformation. Despite conquest, disease, forced assimilation, and centuries of marginalization, Maya communities endured. Their survival is a profound act of resilience, quiet, persistent, and powerful. Revival and recognition. In recent decades, there has been a renaissance of Maya identity. Indigenous rights movements, cultural preservation programs, and language revitalization efforts are helping Maya youth reclaim their heritage. In Guatemala, the 1996 Peace Accords recognized the rights of indigenous peoples and opened pathways for cultural autonomy. Traditional authorities have returned to public life, and Maya spirituality has gained legal recognition. Artists, writers, and filmmakers of Maya descent are telling their own stories, redefining what it means to be Maya in the 21st century. In schools and universities, Maya history is no longer taught as an extinct chapter, but as a living continuum. In communities across Chiapas, Petén, and the Yucatan, old rituals are practiced in new ways. Elders pass on ancient knowledge not just through ceremony, but through smartphone apps, podcasts, and documentaries. The legacy is not static. It evolves. Global reflections. To study the Maya is to confront the full arc of civilization. It is to marvel at human achievement and to reckon with human fragility. The Maya built in harmony with their environment, yet suffered when balance was lost. They developed vast political networks, then fractured under their own weight. They charted the heavens, but could not escape earthly troubles. And yet, from the ruins, we learn. We learn that sustainability matters, that power must be accountable, that no civilization, no matter how advanced, is immune to its own choices.
But we also learned that culture is not so easily destroyed. Even after cities fall, even after centuries of silence, people endure. Languages survive. Memories linger. And seeds, buried long ago, can still grow. The Maya legacy. The Maya were not just a people of the past. They are a people of the present and the future. Their legacy lives in every child learning to speak Conjabal, in every astronomer inspired by their calendars, in every conservationist studying ancient agricultural techniques. It lives in the stones that still stand and in the hands that still shape maize into tortillas, that still weave the cosmos into thread. Their story is not just about collapse. It is about continuity. Not just about mystery, but meaning. Final thought. As we close this journey through time, we are left with more than answers. We are left with questions. What will future civilizations say of us? Will our monuments endure? Will our knowledge survive? And will we, like the Maya, find ways to adapt, to endure, to remember? Because civilizations rise and fall, but legacy is eternal.